Welcome in Basketball by Association. It is the big, beautiful Wednesday BbA Byte, baby. Your midweek chow down on a little NBA talk from the association. Arky is me. That is Joel Cordes. Wait, right? Nope, got it wrong. Got it wrong again. That is Joel Cordes on the video screen. Joel, hello, sir.
How do, everyone? I know we've got a lot to get to today, and I want to remind you before we do that if you're listening on the audio version, Spotify, Spreaker, iTunes, wherever, and you want the video version, come on over to YouTube. Please give us a like, a subscribe, a share, all of that goodly stuff. And if you're on YouTube and for some reason you need audio only, which does happen from time to time, you can find us basically wherever podcasts are, and we are free. So that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. There is one game we will just probably run out of time to talk about, so let's start with the other stuff. How about most recently last night? How about King Luka and the Dallas Mavericks? The Clippers fall to 0-2 at home for this series when it sort of looked like maybe, just maybe, with a different coach that they got some of these issues sort of settled. But Luka has been a hammer amongst nails in this series. Joel, Dallas up 2-0. We did not see this one coming.
No, we didn't. I mean, the Clippers have been my pick to make it out of the West as finalists this year. But we're seeing still some of the Clippers' issues at play here. I'll get to Luka in a minute because, yeah, he's been phenomenal. Some of the Clippers' issues have been the heavy reliance on Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, which continued. Both of those guys scored at a healthy rate. They were effective. Paul George was 1 of 7 from downtown, but still 28 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists, and was generally effective. He was 12 for 22. But the same thing that happened in game 1, where you don't have enough scoring help outside of 15 points from Reggie Jackson, you're still looking for a third guy to step up and get close to that 20-point range. And if the supporting cast is not going to field a guy who gets up into that range, much less multiple players to get above 10 points, which, again, no one did outside of Reggie Jackson in game 2, then you better step up amongst the supporting cast and get some stops if you're not going to bring the offensive side. And that did not happen again. And this ties into what we're talking about with Luka. Luka's been great, but you know what? Luka's been great generally all year outside of a slow first 4 to 6 weeks where you could tell he was a little tired and laboring. The supporting cast of the Dallas Mavericks continues to chip in, despite the fact that off the bench, they didn't have anybody above 10 points. But you look at the starting lineup, they got 20 out of Porzingis, 13 out of Kleba, 28 out of Hardaway Jr., and then 2 guys off the bench, and Jalen Brunson and Jason Richardson, who had 9 points. So they're spreading the wealth, but you know what? The Dallas Mavericks have also done that mostly all year, with some exceptions because they had COVID issues too, and some injury issues. But I think the big difference for them is that where a lot of their supporting cast guys were overachieving during the year, it was sometimes overachieving just to keep them in games. But now when you add Porzingis back into the mix and he can give you 30 minutes and 20 points and can generally just be big in the lane, which he did, even though he didn't get a lot of rebounds. He did have a couple of blocks and a couple of steals, but he's another threat. And now when the rest of the supporting cast guys continue to overachieve, it's icing on the cake because you're already in a pretty good place. That's what I'm seeing from this matchup.
Yeah, and let's not act like that very similar teams didn't just play last year, and Luka and the Mavericks had a lot of offensive success against this team. And, I think we'll sort of leave it there with this series.
I've got one more takeaway, just a little feather in the cap for Luka. After game 1, I said, you know what? They need to get Kawhi and Paul George guarding him more and less of the supporting cast because he's torching him. We saw a lot more Kawhi Leonard on Luka, and it still didn't matter. He's still a heck of a game. I just want to give that shout out to him.
That's sort of fall away or falling to the side three that he hits near the end of the third quarter, Luka does, as he's sort of bringing the ball up the court. Like, that's over Kawhi. You're like, I don't know what you're supposed to do with that. Like, sometimes a guy is just awesome, and he's just going to give you, and if you only give him like an inch or two, Luka's really good to take advantage of that inch or two, especially when he was sort of feeling it again last night. So, I wanted to piggyback on top of that sort of idea that these two teams faced last year, and things have changed with the game that didn't play last night, but the night before, which was Milwaukee and Miami, in which Milwaukee also played Miami last year, but Milwaukee seems to have learned from that Miami experience last year in another victory against the Miami Heat, but this one a little more comfortable than the first one.
It certainly was. I don't think you can you can't assume that you're going to hit a record number of threes during the first half, or that Bryn Forbes will be out there playing Papa Shot. But
how about that guy? How about Bryn Forbes?
That's called giving your team a lift off the bench. I hope Clippers bench players, you're listening right now. But I will say this: the Bucks, they've been in the driver's seat defensively and have kind of been going punch for punch with Miami, who's a very good defensive team of their own.
Let's hit that real quick. That's been kind of the surprising point, don't you think? That Milwaukee's not only been just as physical, but a lot of times more so physical than Miami. And I've kind of been surprised that Milwaukee, because I guess I haven't really seen it, has been this consistently able to deliver such strong defensive efforts.
I think we know the Bucks are capable of it. Certainly,
they have the ability. I just don't think we've seen it nearly as much.
Right. We haven't seen it deployed consistently, and we haven't always seen it deployed with an edge against other really good teams. The Bucks, over the last couple of seasons, and this is a common Mike Budenholzer issue, they've kind of gotten that reputation as front runners, right? Where they play really well against some of the bad teams. They win the games they're supposed to. They look really great with the system. But if you hit them hard enough, if you disjoint their own system a little bit, then all of a sudden they start to get shaky and they're a little weak-kneed. Right now, through 2 games, because remember, a lot can change. The Clippers could come back against the Mavs in 2 games. The Heat could turn this series around. It's early in the playoffs, and you never want to make too much. But through 2 games, Milwaukee has been the aggressors defensively, and that has led into good offense. And then it also helps that their 3-point shooters, of which they have more this year than they had last year even, let's not discount that, those guys have been on and hitting. And you can spread out a really good defense like Miami when they've got to spend so much time on Giannis, and they have to spend a good amount of time on Middleton and attention to those guys. But all of the side characters are hitting threes every time they're open, which is a lot. So it was just kind of an avalanche against Miami. I will say this for the Heat. They have been one of those teams that has shown they bounce back regardless of what kind of game they had previously. You kind of wind up getting the same effort the next time. And Milwaukee definitely cannot start feeling comfortable in this series. You have to continue to be the bully on the defensive end and to really show Miami, like, we're physical and you're not getting past us this year.
Yeah, I think I still think this series goes 6. But if we see a similar, I shouldn't say similar because you shouldn't say records are similar. If we see a similar outcome, a win, and maybe a win where in the fourth quarter, the last handful of minutes, it's not urgent time for Milwaukee, I think, at least in my eyes, I'm going to start reconsidering Milwaukee, how deep they can be in the playoffs, and if they could be a serious Eastern Conference contender, because this is something against good teams I feel like we've been absent of seeing the last couple of years.
Yeah, and there's one takeaway from the stats out of this. A lot of people will look and go, well, wait a minute. Milwaukee hit a lot of threes. They hit 22 of them. That's incredible. But they also took 53 three-pointers. 53 of their 94 attempts were from downtown. And the old guys, of course, will say, oh, this is a sign that this team's going to live and die by the 3. You just watch. When they can't hit them, they're in big trouble. And I look at that and say, yes, but when you get the eyeball test and watch the game, Most of those threes came because the defense was getting collapsed and they were able to kick out into good looks. So if I'm the Miami Heat and I want to stop this, it's not actually about guarding the three-point line better. It's stopping the collapsing of the paint. It's taking away some of those Giannis drives and those dump downs and that sort of thing. And Drew Holiday got where he wanted to go generally. It's taking away that and then being able to stick home and close out on those three-pointers. And Milwaukee has to recognize that if it's not that kind of a night where those threes are not falling or they're not getting that collapsing of the paint, you're right. You cannot settle then for 53 three-pointers. I didn't see settling in game 2, but we know old guys regardless, sometimes you can fall in love with the three and it can come back to bite you if it's a bailout shot.
It will be interesting if they sort of go from we took these threes because they were good shots and not fall into the we're in a rhythm shooting three, so let's just see if we can keep the good times rolling. Mm-hmm. The Lakers even up the series against the Suns last night in what was a nice effort from Los Angeles. Important to note that Chris Paul, who was hurt in game 1 with his shoulder, did come back in that game in game 1 while we were recording and got to game 2, but did not play well in game 2 because of the shoulder and was pulled out of game 2. And sort of Chris Paul's status is, I'm sure, going to nut up and play at some point. But Phoenix looks like a much different team when there's a hurt, injured Chris Paul.
Absolutely. And this is deja vu all over again because we've seen Paul get dinged up in very key playoff series and his teams literally and figuratively hurt because of that. You know, that happened with the Rockets previously against the Warriors in a kind of almost legacy shifting type of series, not only for Houston, but also for Golden State. And you can't help but feel that is possible here right now. You've got this young up and coming Phoenix team that without their leader on the floor, they are different. He, I thought, was effective in the 23 minutes he played because he still was able to move the ball and make the right decisions. He had 3 turnovers, only 5 assists, 6 points, but he did bail them out a couple of times where their offense was stalling and Paul was still able to get to the mid-range and hit a big jumper, even though it was just a couple of them. Those were key moments. And that game turned into kind of the classic can't get over the hump type of contest where LA, after about, a little ways through the first quarter, about halfway through, kind of jumped into a 6 to 8 point lead. And it felt like the rest of the game, Phoenix was trying to get back and they couldn't get closer than 4-6 points before LA would generally jump out to 8 to 10 again. I know they did tie it up late on a run, but there too, you're trying to overcome something. And Cam Payne gave him 19 points, sure, but Cam Payne getting his points as a score first point guard is not as beneficial to Phoenix when you've got the rest of the starters out there who all need to eat and then aren't getting their touches. And if they do, it's not coming in good rhythm shots. They're having to create something. I will say this for the Lakers. They've done a phenomenal job since the second half of game 1 of forcing doubles at Devin Booker to the point that he's looking for those doubles. And yeah, he still scores on them at times, but he knows it's coming and it is taking him a little bit out of a rhythm. And now you're going to need other guys. And without Chris Paul, this one's tough, but you're really going to need Mikal Bridges and DeAndre Ayton. And yes, Cam Payne as well, maybe Cam Johnson. Other guys out of that have to come up and be able to score on their own. And that was a little shaky in game 2. It felt like the Suns were having to work for everything they got, whereas the Lakers were generally, I don't want to say falling into good looks, but it was just coming a lot easier for them to stay ahead.
You think the Suns go as far as Chris Paul's able to play and take them?
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah, absolutely. He's got to be able to play 25 to 35 minutes a game, and he's got to be effective. He doesn't have to be dominating, but he has to be effective and allow Payne then to slide into his more traditional bench scorer role. And then the other things we talked about as well have to be true. Somebody's got to pick up the shooting slack for Paul, but I still think he can set the table as long as he can dribble effectively. He was doing that okay, but again, maybe the trainers in Phoenix know something we don't, and they were afraid of him breaking down during that game.
The Grizzlies win game 1 against Utah. I think another one of those games I don't think anybody sort of saw coming. You and I saw
No,
this
I
coming.
predicted. Yeah, I predicted that one.
You and I were looking at it saying 9 points. That's a lot to give this Memphis team who may be bouncing in with some pretty neat momentum. They take advantage, and not only do they cover the +9, but they win the game outright. Game 2 is tonight. What's their number? 9.5 still points that they're being given against Utah. I guess assuming Utah is going to be able to do some kind of adjustment and to kind of bait the public into betting Utah. Ja Morant's for real, brother. This playoffs has seen a couple of young stars and young studs stand out early on into it. Ja Morant's definitely one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were a lot of other factors at play in that game 1 besides the Grizzlies just playing well and the momentum that you talked about. There's also the fact that you don't have any Donovan Mitchell, and we've said Utah is not the same team. They are way too.
He was mad. He was mad that they sat him. The report was he was going to be available and ready to play. We talked about that, and then shortly after we recorded, Utah said they were going to sit him for game 1, and he was mad about that. He'll be ready for game 2, but he was not happy about sitting in game 1.
Right. And so it brings into game 2 now a few of the concerns from before, which is rust. How quickly can he shake that off? Because he is the one guy on that roster who can manufacture offense outside of Jordan Clarkson, who kind of like campaign is better coming off the bench and doing that against second unit guys and filling in the gaps when Donovan Mitchell sits. If you ask him to do too much, the cracks start to show. And we saw that a little bit, an 0 of 8 night for Clarkson in game 1 against a really good Grizzlies defense. So Mitchell not only has to be back, he's got to be effective. He's got to be able to manufacture offense. And then when he does that, it allows all of the quote unquote system guys to really be able to thrive within what the Jazz do. And then they are as dangerous as advertised when that happens because they make the right choices. They've got phenomenal shooters. You've got Rudy Gobert, gobbling up a ton of rebounds inside and able to finish off a lot of that stuff too. So I still see Utah taking this series. That one's not in question. But the bigger issue is how quickly does Donovan Mitchell shake the rust off? That's going to determine whether this is just a 5-game series and the Grizzlies stole one early, or whether this becomes more of a matchup. And again, I like a lot of what Memphis is able to do, but Utah really is that good of a team if Donovan Mitchell is Donovan Mitchell. If they're not, they're an upset special all the way.
Yeah, I like Utah to win tonight. I don't like them to cover 10 points. It's just, again, it's a ton of points with that big unknown as far as the rust versus rest factor with Donovan Mitchell. You think he'd come out like a bat out of hell, ready to play and just ready to put up 1,000 points. But I don't know. Not when it's just like he's not been resting for funsies. He's been resting off an injury. Hey, speaking of 1,000 points, they don't play game 2 until tomorrow night, but Portland trails 1-0 to Denver. And Dame Lillard decided to, I think, score all the points for Portland in the first half. 32.
They're tied up 1-1. Denver.
Oh, sorry. It's game 3 tomorrow. 3 tomorrow.
Yep.
Joel, let me ask you a question. Let's be honest. Are you surprised Denver is back with a vengeance so quickly after game 2? Because they won that game by 20 points.
Yeah, no, it's not an entire surprise to me. I do think this is one of those that has a potential to go 7 games. We've talked about that. It's going to be kind of punch for punch, shot for shot, and it really is going to come down to Lillard versus Jokic, even though they don't play the same position. In game 1, Portland dared Jokic to be a scorer. And that was a little bit uncomfortable for him because he still wanted to facilitate. Other guys were not hitting shots. And Portland, despite being a bad defensive team most of the year, matches up with this Denver Nuggets squad that doesn't have a lot of scoring from their guards when you don't have Will Barton and, of course, no Jamal Murray. They don't really have a guy who can punish the Portland defenders in the backcourt, that being, of course, Lillard and McCollum. They can't punish those guys. They can just get some here and there. So Jokic in game 2, was 15 of 20 from the floor, 38 points. You saw a little bit more of him being assertive as a scorer first, which then opened up other people. Of course, Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon chipped in. They did a nice job, and Monte Morris off the bench did have 12 points, 7 assists. Those are the type of taking advantage of sort of scenarios you're going to need. Facundo Campazzo had 12 points as well in the starting lineup. So if you can get 24 points from your point guard position, that's punishing the Blazers in the backcourt enough that they have to start moving around a little bit more. And if Jokic can get all of the points, if he can just eat and nobody can really stop him or slow him down, it will eventually start to bring that second help defender, and that is what Jokic wants. The Nuggets want people to collapse on Nikola Jokic because then he's at his best finding the open guy. But if everybody from Portland just stays home and you're able to guard straight up, yeah, Jokic might get his points, but unless he's ultra aggressive about that, it may not be enough because the other guys just, Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. do have to contend with Robert Covington and Norman Powell. That's going to make them work. And the Nuggets guards, they're not those guys, I'm sorry, to bust out 25 points apiece and really punish where the Blazers are weak.
Yeah, a couple minutes left to talk about, I think, two other things I think that are interesting, but real quick. Dame Lillard had 22 points in the second quarter.
Yeah.
Like when Dame Time's playing Dame Time, how fun is this guy to watch?
Absolutely. And the narrative coming out of that game was, Aaron Gordon guarded him in the second half and slowed him down. Well, he still had 20 points in the second half. Slowed down is very relative when you're talking 22 versus 20 points. But Denver was able to tighten up elsewhere. Yeah, I mean, Lillard's ability to get whatever shot he wants is, there's a few guys in the league who can do that from outside. Jamal Murray can do it in a more limited fashion, but it's kind of trending in that direction. Of course, there's Steph Curry, and there's a few other guys like James Harden, who gets to his spots in the lane. Luka kind of gets to his spots wherever. But Lillard, you literally can call him unguardable more often than not. Even when the defense plays really well with him, his ability to pull up from wherever and to be able to kind of snake his way through picks, whether it be above the three-point line or below it, into the shots he wants, is really something to behold. It is fun.
Two more games I want to get to, including the Boston Celtics, who, they ran into a team playing two halves yesterday in the Brooklyn Nets. Down 2-0. Not much of a game really at all throughout it. An offensive explosion from tip to tip for Brooklyn. And this is kind of what we thought Brooklyn could be when these guys to play together. And at least in the first two games of the playoffs together, second half of game one and game two, they look really tough to beat, Joel.
Brooklyn is thoroughly outclassing Boston, and this is a good warm-up for them against a Celtics team that, especially without Jaylen Brown, they just don't have a chance. And remember, this is not a team that has shown a lot of mental resilience and fortitude throughout the season anyway. They've had their consistency problems all over the board, and they have had the tendency to get blown out badly at times. And so all of that is coming together, and it allows Brooklyn to get their big three on the floor together, continue to work out the chemistry before the tests get tougher. You saw it even in the fourth quarter a little bit, and certainly late in the third. Brad Stevens pulled his starters early from that one, and Steve Nash kept his starters on the floor for quite a bit longer against Boston's second and third units. And a lot of people would go, wait a minute, why are you doing that? You've got injury-prone guys. You're just rolling the dice with danger there. And there is some truth to that, but at the same time, you haven't had many games together. You won't get many practices during the playoffs. So he's got to use that time to get them together because it's going to get a lot tougher from here. But yeah, they're cooked.
The only thing I want to mention about that is their radio play-by-play guy, Boston's that is. Let me think. I was just inducted in the Basketball Hall of Fame. I'll think of it in a second. Gordon. It worked out. I'll get to it. He went on a radio station in Boston and said that if Jayson Tatum is close to not 100% because he got poked in the eye, they should just sit him, because what they're basically looking at is an inevitability with what Brooklyn's doing in this team. And if he's not ready by Friday to go and to go anywhere better than 60 or 70% because of that eye, that they may just sort of pack it in. And that's kind of an interesting way to look at it if you're Boston coming home to play a couple of games before hopefully your season's over. Hopefully, because I'm a Knicks fan.
I mean, unless he's endangering himself by playing, I think that's the wrong message to send. Certainly, you could leave that in Tatum's hands, if you're trustworthy that it's kind of a 50-50 scenario. But I think it's the wrong message to send if you're the Celtics, because it's not really about this season that's gone awry. It still is about trying to build a culture on a team that has had huge expectations, that has had a revolving door with some of its biggest free agent signings. You think about the fact that like Al Horford didn't work out, and Kyrie left, and Gordon Hayward left, and you have some big decisions looming now with whether Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown are the guys, and how does Kemba Walker fit into this, much less Marcus Smart. And then Brad Stevens, what's his future there? There's a lot there. So the message still has to be fight, give yourself a chance, even see if you can steal one game away from Brooklyn if they let you off the ropes or have a bad night. Like, you never know what can happen. So unless Tatum's endangering himself by playing, I would wholeheartedly disagree with running up the white flag. But let's be honest here, you can still give a good fight and get blown away in this series. And going home, Boston has not had a lot of fight all year, and they've been booed at home multiple times this season. And this ain't like Philadelphia where, they boo you sometimes, but that's just the way it is. Like, that's kind of a big thing if your own Boston Celtics faithful are booing you multiple times on the season. So I don't see that being entirely the home court advantage that it could be, especially if they get down early. There may be, like you said, that sense of an inevitability, and then kind of a shoulder shrug, and you go meekly into the night.
It's their TV play-by-play, Mike Gorman, who said that. One small thing I want to mention, because I don't want to harp on it, because it's Kyrie Irving sort of central. But Kyrie said after the game, he was asked about this actually being the first time he's going to be able to play in Boston since leaving Boston with fans actually in attendance.
Which is kind of amazing considering how long he's been gone when you think about it.
Yeah, he's been hurt, or the pandemic happened, something to that effect, to sort of not allow him to be able to play in Boston. And he was asked whether or not he is excited about it, and he said that he's not going to be intimidated. He sort of expects to go on the road. It's the same everywhere. But he did say he did want to make sure there was no I try to remember the phrasing.
Subtle racism was.
So he said he didn't want to be any subtle racism.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say that comes off to me as someone who can easily blame any kind of booze he gets on not what he actually did to that city and that team, and why he wasn't a giant butthole when he left. And he could just sort of blame it for a city who has had a checkered past when it comes to race relations, when it comes to its basketball program, baseball programs, forever. That there's a history in that city. And if you just throw that out there, I don't think it's cool, man. I don't think it's cool unless you actually experience it. I think it's really, really low rent.
I think you hit both sides of the coin there, because on the one hand, that approach could be abused if you're going to call any and all booing of, hey, you didn't cheer me. That must mean there's racism going on. Certainly players get booed all the time for lots of different circumstances in leaving, and you wouldn't say it's racist. However, as you alluded to, the other side of the coin is, and this goes back decades and decades and decades, and really, if you want to say a century plus, but Boston has not been a great example of race relations. And there are lots of stories, just like there are out in Utah. There are lots of stories of fans crossing the line in the way that they heckle and taking it from, oh yeah, we're having a good time, we're kind of ragging on the opposing team or whatever, into somewhere really personal and dark and sometimes even outright evil. There's a long history of that stuff going on too. And it's not for you or I to say that Kyrie hasn't heard that stuff before or experienced that stuff before in Boston. And certainly if Kyrie himself hasn't, I 100% can guarantee that he's got buddies and knows other players that have, because that has been a thing. Yeah. So you're right. Well, it's maybe counterproductive for him to bring that up, like, especially before it happens, to just kind of like assume guilt. That may be the classic kind of Kyrie counterproductivity that we've seen a lot of. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and say he's 100% wrong for saying, you know, it's not really been a nice place to be sometimes. And maybe that has a little bit to do with, you know, and I'm insinuating here, but there is that fact that it's not really been a free agent destination. Guys have left, even though you would think it's a big market and people should want to play there more often than they do. I do think there's something to that.
One of the two most historic franchises in all the game, as far as championships are concerned, at the very least, you would think, yeah, they would want to. Listen, he has said out loud before that he personally has not experienced any kind of racism when it comes to Boston. I just think to throw it in discussion of what do you expect when you get there, for him just to throw in the word subtle, like I just don't want to have any subtle racism happening. It's like, no, don't. Not unless you've experienced something. Don't just start this thing off by saying, hey, listen, they come out there and they boo me. I don't know, man. Is it just because, you know, I told them I would resign and I didn't, and I conspired with Kevin Durant at the All-Star break and to leave and go to Brooklyn and lied about it? Like, is it all that, or is it because the city's racist?
I don't disagree with what you're saying there, because there are better ways he could have put it, such as, hey, come on, you know, I'm going to be out there. They're passionate. I understand they're mad at me. Boo away. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. You know, let's just keep it classy between each other. Say something like that. Just, you know, keep it classy, and you can boo me all you want. Go ahead and say that, and that's fine. And then if somebody does cross that line, you can talk about it after the fact and go, yeah, I came back, and unfortunately, like, some of the fans were saying some really nasty stuff that has no place in the game, and address it there and get it out in the open that, yes, it happened again. And I'm just pointing it out because you don't get to hide behind sitting in the stands and being a complete jerk. You know, like, you can get called out for that stuff, and people should know if you're acting like that. But I agree with you that handling that kind of, if there's been something for somebody to be guilty about, fine, but don't assume guilt ahead of time. You can still allude to what you're trying to get at without, like you said, kind of being so assumptive and hot button about it. I don't know.
Yeah. Being a little bit of a narrative whitewashing there. I mean, no pun intended. He's trying to change the narrative before the narrative even happens.
Right. They have good reason to not like him.
They have the best reasons not to like that. You came to them. You were close to winning an Eastern Conference championship and going to play the finals and possibly winning that. You said, I want to come back. I want to be a Boston Celtic. And then in the middle of the season, you're conspiring to go to Brooklyn. Like, and then when you found out about it, he was like, no, that's not true. It's like, of course they have reason to hate you. You dipped their team. Anyway, last thing I want to talk about, and we can spend 3 to 5 seconds on this. The Knicks were close to winning on Sunday, and they do play again tonight. They're the 2-point favorites as we speak. But what did I say on the podcast? Watch for Elfrid Payton and what happens to him. And Joel, he played 8 minutes. That's because Tom Thibodeau was like, nope. Pulled early in both halves. In fact, he wasn't even anywhere near the court to try to guard Trae Young, and maybe, you know, on that final shot, maybe he would have had it back. I don't know. But I would be shocked if Elfrid Payton starts game 2 tonight at the point guard spot.
Yeah, I think that part of it is irrelevant, honestly, to me. I still think the Knicks are the favorite in the series. We did say Atlanta's capable of getting a couple of games off of them. They did. You coined it perfectly before game 1, saying, I don't want any part of a close game where the ball is in Trae Young's hands. That is exactly, that's exactly why. And so the Knicks need to be putting themselves in a position where it's not such a close game back and forth, and they need to be able to instill their will a little bit more. But credit to Atlanta, who we thought might be a little shell-shocked coming into a game one. And it was a very rowdy Madison Square Garden. It was a fun playoff atmosphere. And the Hawks rose to that challenge, right?
I know you hate the Knicks, but listening to the defense chants in Madison Square Garden and hearing the Oregon, like, that was fun. That was fun as far as it gave me the old school. And up until like 2 days ago, like I felt we got in a lot of old Eastern Conference basketball being played, and sort of that was right up there typical with it. The way both teams played, the low scoring, the closeness of it, and the Madison Square Garden give me all the feels again.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll say this, for me, it's less even that it's Madison Square Garden. It's just so nice to have so many fans back and loud arenas. It's not everywhere, but you heard it in Brooklyn. You heard some of it going on in Philadelphia. You heard it in some of the West Coast games as well. Phoenix was really loud last night. It is a fun, great feeling. I hope that we always appreciate it now, knowing that it can be taken away. Kudos to the Hawks for being able to weather that, but it's just one game, and there's a lot of work left to do on both sides in that series.
Yeah, I think the Knicks were up 4 with like 51 seconds or 52 seconds or something, but they were up. The Knicks were up 4, but the Hawks had the ball, kind of thing.
And we won't get into this much today because we're out of time. But I did tell you off the air. I said Trae Young is definitely on track to becoming this generation's Reggie Miller versus Madison Square Garden. And for anybody who's not a Knicks fan, that's an incredibly fun thing. And even most Knicks fans deep down got to admit that having a foil is still kind of a fun thing.
It better not be Trae Young. That just better not be the foil. That's all I'm telling you. I will take Durant. I will take Harden. I will take Jokic. I don't know how that would become a big foil, but I would take. I don't want Trae. I don't want him to be the foil. I don't need him to be.
Too dangerous. Is that the issue? Too young? There's a lot of time left.
He's too salty. Like the fact that, look, dude, I love the fact very early in the game, they were chanting F Trae Young, which was great with the crowd. And at the very end, he does the shh and says it's quiet AF.
That was Reggie Miller choke symbol level right there. It was.
But it's great villainous sports. It just shouldn't happen to my team. That's all. It's great for the sport. Just let it happen to like Philly or something. It doesn't have to happen to New York. We have our own history with that. Okay, we don't need a Trae Young becoming a Reggie Miller and doing that ish. Not in your first playoff game against. Oh my God. Okay, whatever, Joel. I'm not mad. I told you the Knicks are just winning 5. That's all.
That's all, folks.